Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache from NacheSnow.com. Welcome, my friends. Okay, so what are we talking about today? Today we are talking about building a second brain, which has been made more popular by the book called Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte, which I've recently read, which inspired this episode. Another name for this also is personal knowledge management, PKM. So we're also going to talk today about just creating a personal knowledge management system, aka a second brain. This is something that I have been doing for years. So my system is a little bit complex, but I'll break down to you how you can start small and then eventually add to your system. But it's really great because we are inundated with information, and it is literally impossible to keep all of it in our brain unless you are some kind of genius, which I am not. My memory already isn't that great, and as I'm getting older, my memory I feel like is getting worse. So me building this PKM or second brain system has been extremely helpful as I try to complete projects, recall information, share information with people. It has saved me hours and hours of researching and trying to figure out where I saw that thing because I have a system that is already set up. Okay, a few housekeeping things. Anything I mention in this episode, all the resources will be over at nachesnow.com/179. Remember, I have a new Skillshare course out, how to use Milanote for vision boarding over at Skillshare, nachesnow.com/Skillshare. And also, if you don't already have a Skillshare account, we'll get 30 days free with my link. If you love this episode, please rate me 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. If you're listening to me on Spotify or another place, please rate me there. YouTube, give me a thumbs up. And wherever you're listening, please subscribe, my friends. Okay, so let's get into it. So I mentioned read the book Building a Second Brain because I've been doing this for years, but I wanted to understand a little bit more what Tiago's approach is to building a second brain. I think it's a really good book, but I feel like his book is it caters more towards creating projects and organizing those projects, where I'll talk a little bit about that today, but my thing is really just figuring out how to capture knowledge that you might need to refer to every day, regardless if it is attached or linked to a project or not. But his book, it covers a spectrum of things, but his is more project based. He has kind of specific methodologies of what you can do in order to organize content for use in projects. If you're interested in that, definitely check out his book. Some other books that I have found to be useful through the years related to organization, not necessarily digitally organizing your things, are A Minute to Think, Atomic Habits, How to Get Stuff Done. That's the clean version of it. And The One Thing. I think all of those books are excellent reads if you are in the process of trying to figure out how you can be more productive and get things done. So I'll link all of those. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to talk to you guys about how I do things, but I am also going to bring up some things that I thought were very useful in the Building a Second Brain book. And so the first thing that I will bring up is he talks about this. There's a power in writing things down. And back in the day, artists and so forth, scientists used to use what is a commonplace book. And essentially, that book is just like a journal where they would always have this journal with them, writing things down and so forth. And so now, of course, we still journal, some of us, I still journal, but now with technology, we have these ways where we can save things in certain areas, tag them, categorize them. And so we can now create this digital commonplace book. So to that point, I just want to say, I do still think there is a power in writing things down. But if you need to reference those things later, I think you need to move them over somehow into your digital space in the appropriate space so it doesn't get lost and you're not thumbing through several notebooks trying to find that idea you wrote down. So there is a place for both, but definitely now in this digital age, anything that you'll need later, you need to make sure you capture that digitally. Another thing that he mentions in the book is like self-direction is impossible without self-knowledge. Like you have to understand who you are in order to figure out like where you're going and where you should be going. And to me, my big takeaway with that is you need to understand your habits. You need to understand like your wants and desires, and that will then help you create a structure for capturing all the things and helping you to become your best self because you know yourself. So start to really pay attention to what is important to you and what you really should be focusing on and what content should you really be paying attention to, because a lot of times we are so inundated with the news and newspapers and books, audio and paper form, and then we have social media, and then we have videos, and then we have this, and then we have that, and then we're trying to consume like all the things, but it's like, but actually, should we? Is it really helping us? And so the more you know yourself, the more you can block out some of the noise. Another key thing from the book that I want to mention before getting into my particular process, he mentioned how professional chefs have noticeable habits to organize as they go. And I love this because I don't really cook, but I am that person. I think even on a recent episode, I mentioned that I have this motto like everything has a place. So my scissors go in a particular place. My journal goes in the same place every time. I put my purse, my keys, everything has a place. So I don't even have to think about where something is and get caught up for 15-20 minutes as I'm leaving out the door because I don't know where I put my keys, my phone, my this, my that, because everything has a place. You should also think of that digitally too, which will make more sense when I go through my system, because if you have a specific place where you put certain types of content, when that moment comes and you need to bring that content up for a project, during a discussion, or whatever you need it for, you will know exactly where to get it because you put everything in its place, just like a chef. Making a chef more efficient, you are the chef making yourself more efficient. He also mentions this thing about monthly reviews or weekly reviews, but reviewing your systems and reviewing your content. And I do think that is really important. So, for example, with email, like at the end of every week, go through your email. Okay, let me just start with my system now that I'm talking about review. So for email, regardless, I have like several email accounts. I have an old school Yahoo one. I have a couple of Gmail accounts. Each one has its very specific purpose. Like, for example, my Yahoo email is only for junk mail, if you will. And it's not necessarily junk, but it's when I sign up for something or for newsletters or for things like that. So even though I call it my junk mail or my spam email address, I actually use that email, and I'm in that inbox more than any other email inbox, only because I want to see my coupons. I want to see the latest newsletters from some of my favorite content creators. I want to see whatever it is. But the thing about it is I can easily get to what I want because I have folders set up in my email, and then I also have filters set up for things that I know that I don't mind looking at in the future. And I don't have filters set up for emails that I'm subscribed to that I want to make sure I don't miss. So those continue to go to my inbox. But then after I've finished reading them, then I move them to the folder. So that's like my system for emails. And when it comes to review, like he mentioned, usually every month, I'll go through all of my email accounts just to make sure they're all nice and clean. I do like inbox zero, but for anything that I need to take action on, I always leave them in my inbox. So sometimes I will have 5 or 7 emails in there, but during that review, I could see if they're still relevant, if I still need to take action on them, or if I need to folder them. So that is part of the system. Another thing that I review, for example, and try to organize are websites. And so for me, just the other day, I spent several hours because over the course of the last couple of months, if I heard somebody mention a website, what I would do on my phone, like most of us do, is I would open it up and then I'd be like, I'll get to it later. So I spent like all morning and part of an afternoon going through every one of the websites that I had saved on my phone, because the reason why I opened them up is because I thought that they were useful. And so what I did is I opened it up quickly, scanned it, determined if it was something that needed to be saved or if it's something that I could just swipe away and delete. If it needs to be saved, in Notion, so for those of you not familiar with Notion, Notion is a knowledge management system, and I have several pages in Notion where I organize content. And one of those pages happens to be for websites. And so any websites that I want to refer back to later, I will save the link, the name of the website, and I'll also put a note in there if there's something particular that I want to remember about it. And then I will tag it with whatever is relevant: design or photography or productivity or digital tool, whatever the appropriate tag is. So then later on, if I'm like, man, what was that website that I saw last year, last month, 5 years ago? It doesn't matter, that referenced X, Y, and Z. I can easily find it in that database that I've created in Notion. Now, you don't have to use Notion. You can use Evernote. You can use your Notes app. You can use whatever you want that makes sense for you for saving that type of content. But for me, I often refer back to websites. And so for me, it was important that I created an organized database. And I even have it where one of the entries in the database is where I can star something. So if it's a website that I really want to dig into later, it's starred. So anytime in the next month, if I want to do a review of websites that I've starred, and I really want to see, I know to go into that database and go into the section with all the starred content. And it's good to do a review of all the things because it helps make sure that your digital space stays uncluttered. Now, for you, maybe you don't care about websites or saving websites, or maybe on your web browser, the bookmarking feature that is with the web browser works for you. And so you could just use that and you could create folders right within Safari or whatever you're using, Google Chrome, whatever. The point of this is that if you are someone that often finds yourself trying to look for emails, look for websites, look for whatever, make sure that you create an easy system that allows you to retrieve the information that you'll need later. And even for my Yahoo account that I use to sign up for all the things, I have very specific folders over there. So, for example, bills, books, class, coupons, home. I have newsletter, Notion. I have receipts, reservations. I have travel. So anything that fits into these buckets, right? If I'm ever looking for something, I know I could go directly to that folder and find it, or I could find something with a search. Anywho, hope that kind of gives you an idea on how you can begin to organize your content. Creating this knowledge management system can seem very overwhelming, but what you have to ask yourself first is, what is it that needs to be organized that will help my life be better? Is it emails? Is it organizing photos? Is it organizing articles? Is it organizing, I don't know, whatever it might be? And then just start with that one thing. And then once you create a system for that and you create a habit, then you incorporate something else, and then you incorporate something else. And then before you know it, you have all of these habits built in. So when you see certain types of content, you will automatically just know what to do with it. Everything has a place. It is second nature. Let me just give you some other examples of how that works for me. And so on the simplest form of that is, I've mentioned on the podcast before that I love to use the AnyDo app for just things that I need to buy. So if I'm like walking around the house and I'm like, oh, I'm out of soap. Oh, I'm out of corn. Oh, I'm out of this. I just put that in my Any.do app. And the sole purpose of that app is when I go out to Target or Walmart or CVS or the grocery store, I'm not ever guessing about what I need to purchase, because my habit is, if I realize that I need anything, I am going to put it in that app. When I go to Amazon, if I'm decided that I need to order something from Amazon, I will go into my Any.do app and look at the list of things that I know I need and see if it makes sense for me to go ahead and order any of those things from Amazon, and then I can like quickly check them off. So to me, instead of keeping this knowledge in my head on what things I need to buy, new toothbrush this or whatever it is, I don't have to, because my second brain is working for me. And you'll notice that even though you guys know I'm a Notion head, I love it, there is no one app, there's no one size fits all app. Everything has like a good place for it. Could I do this in Notion? I could, but I prefer to do it in the Any.do app. It's just something about how that app is created that, to me, for that type of list gathering, that app makes more sense than the Notion app. And I know it, and it doesn't feel too complicated or like it's too many things for me to remember, because it just works for me. I've built a habit around it. I've re-looked at my processes, and I still like using it. Another example I will give you of my knowledge management system is for articles. Oh my goodness, we are inundated, I think, sometimes with like things to read. And someone will reference something, I'll see something in my Apple News, whatever it might be. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, but I'm always on the go. So I just don't have time to read all the things. But I know that maybe it will be useful for me later. What I've done for years is saved articles in an app called Get Pocket. It also lets you tag the article, and I've found that to be really useful. I've recently started using a new app called Mindstone, and the Mindstone app also lets you tag the content, and then does like a summarization of the content, but then it also gives you a reminder every night or morning. I believe you can set up the times where it'll be like, hey, do you want to read this app? And the goal of the app is to remind you to read the stuff that you're saving. So admittedly, I am not the best at making time to actually read all the articles. But I do like that the articles that I think I want to read later are safe in some place, be it Git Pocket or Mindstone. I do plan to be more mindful about making time to read articles that I thought were useful. And then another thing that I want to mention from Tiago's book that I thought was really good, and I don't necessarily capture information from books or articles this way now for projects, but he said if you are working on a specific project and you come across like a book or an article that has content that might be useful, only highlight and copy and paste that particular content into your project. So let's say if you have a project set up in your Notes app or Notion or Evernote or Trello or whatever you're using, you would import the excerpts or copy and paste the excerpts, however you have it set up, only the most relevant content from that article, and then just link to the full article if needed. And his whole point is that is just a great way to not have to reinvent the wheel, meaning, let's say if you're finally starting on this project, let's say a book you wanted to write or an essay or a presentation you were trying to create, instead of you having to read the 10 articles that you thought were useful for that product, you're going to read only your crib notes, the things that you thought were the most important. And then that will help inform your thinking and you could do it quickly without having to read how many ever articles again. And I thought that was like a great tip that I would start to incorporate even when I'm creating YouTube videos or podcasts and so forth, because a lot of times I'll reread some of the article, then make notes, then come on, to the podcast or whatever. And that's like an inefficient way to use my time. And another thing with that he mentions, which is so true, and I've used it before in some cases, anything that has a share function, you can easily export content out. So he said, even for YouTube, right? You can go to the transcript of any YouTube video for the most part, and then you can cut and paste the portions of the transcript that is most relevant to your project into your like project folder, area, page, or what have you. And so there's a lot of creative ways to make sure that you are only saving the most relevant part of whatever you need. But if that's too advanced for you, if you're like, girl, I ain't got no projects I'm working on, I just want to be able to refer back to whatever I saw that was interesting, at the very least, use Mindstone, Git Pocket, or whatever makes sense for you in order to be able to quickly refer back to articles that you thought were relevant. So you guys know that I am a very creative person. I love inspiration. There's multiple ways that I save content that I think might be useful later. So like I'm a big time journaler, and if for any reason if I'm stuck and I want to look for journal ideas, I know exactly where to go for those ideas. Either I'll go into Pinterest and I'll go into my journal board, or I'll go into Instagram and I'll go into my journal collection, for example. And so what do I mean by that? So for Instagram, there's like a little ribbon button that will let you save content, and you can actually save content to different collections. So over time, I have built different kind of collections, from journal to buy, Bujo, which is bullet journal. So the journaling is usually like art kind of journaling, and the Bujo is like more traditional bullet journaling. I have a category called watercolor and stickers and bookbinding and illustrations and digital planners and lettering, enamel pens, t-shirts, packaging, spaces, creative spaces. And this is just for one of my accounts. That's for my Dreams, Plans, Ideas Instagram account, which is mostly about journaling. But if I go to my Creative Route account, which I only follow really home people and home decor folks, my saved collection is a little different. It's like art, Halloween, home, travels. I do have stained glass over there, ceramic, mosaic art, food, events, illustrations, woven, wooden beads, embroidery, things, all kind of things, punch needle, things that I would do and make for the home. And so when the people I'm following post things where I'm like, oh, that's a beautiful piece of glass, or I love that yarn, or ooh, I might want to try that idea for Halloween, I just hit that little ribbon button and I save it to the appropriate collection. And so, come, for example, October, when I'm trying to think about what to do in the front of my house, I'm going to go to my Halloween folder and I am going to then start sketching and coming up with some ideas on what I want to do for the house. According to Tiago, probably I should have a main project folder and then put all that stuff there. But I kind of don't do that until I am sure and ready I'm going to start the project. So, for example, I have a Halloween collection folder in my Instagram, and I also have a Halloween private board on Pinterest. And so, when I'm ready to actually do the front of the house, then I'll probably start like a Milanote page, and then I will take the best elements from Pinterest, Instagram, anywhere else I might have a Halloween collection board or what have you, and then start putting some of my ideas. Because Amazon, I might have saved some things there, because even in Amazon, I have like different wish list folders. Like I have a general wish list, I have a home wish list, I have a books wish list. And so I'll look through all the different places where I know I have Halloween stuff saved. And then once I'm ready to start that project, I'll start putting stuff on a board. So then I can vision board out like what I want to do. And then that becomes my project folder. But my main point to you is whatever you're on, if it's X now, formerly Twitter, if it's YouTube, if it's Instagram, if it's TikTok, if it's Pinterest, all the different places, every place usually allows you to save content in an organized manner. This is when knowing yourself comes into play, because you want to create folders or collections or just label things where it makes sense to you. So if you're into cars, for example, then maybe you might have classic car, sports car, I don't know, whatever kind of car. And then when you see content that comes your way, you're saving it in a way that will be useful for you later. But the important thing is to start saving things if you think it will be useful. I actually go to my collections and my Pinterest boards often when I am ready to start a creative project or a project for NacheSnow.com, and I can easily find the things that I need because I've created these collections. Another example that I'll give is Audible. And so I have my book wish list, and every time someone recommends a book, I will save that in my Audible account if it's an Audible book. If it's a hard book, I'll just save it in the Amazon wish list. But there's never a time where I'm like, what is that book mentioned? Because I've saved it. And if this feels like overwhelming to you, oh my God, how does she do all this stuff? It's really not, because it's as soon as you see something that you think you will need for later because it's interesting to you, put it somewhere that makes sense. So if the app has a foldering process or collection process or a board you can put it in there and make sure it's labeled correctly. And that's it. It literally takes 2 seconds. If you don't even have time to even review the content, but you just glancing at it know it's interesting, at least you've put it somewhere because there was something about it that sparked your interest. And if wherever you're saving it allows you to put a note, you might just want to also put a quick note about what it is that made you interested in saving it. So when you do refer back to it later, it's just easier to recall like why you saved it. There's one more thing before I get to Notion that I want to mention that I also do. And this has been a lifesaver. This is why my friends love when I plan trips. Anytime on social media or when I'm walking around or talking to people, someone mentions anything that can be saved on Google Maps, a hotel, a restaurant, a museum, whatever it might be, I immediately go to Google and save it. And so in my Google Maps, I have things saved all over the world. All over the world, because Google allows you to not only save it, but then to put things into a specific category. For example, there's a want to go category. So I know anything with a green flag means that one day I want to go to it. And so if I go to a city and I see a whole bunch of green flags, I'm like, oh, these are the places that people have mentioned in the past. Let me check them out again and see if I want to go during this trip. I also have a favorites. And so when I'm even in DC, I can see all the little hearts across DC. And so if I have people coming in town, they're like, oh, what are my food options? I can easily go to my favorites list and be like, oh yeah, you want to try this and that. And then I have other categories like stationery stores. I have Chicago and New York where I save specific things to different city lists. I have a DC museums list, so then I can just see that. But the save to list feature in Google Maps is another way to digitally organize that information, because who has time to remember all their favorite places around the world? That's insane. Like, even I've never been to Japan, but I know all the places I would want to go to Japan if I'm ever able to go, because especially following stationary people, if they mention this store or that store, or while in Japan they did this, I'm like, I want to go. And so I just immediately go to Google, I search it, I save it. And I don't have to try to capture that somehow in my brain. And it makes sense in the Google Maps app because that's where I go for anything location based. So I hope that you're getting a sense of how you can just automatically save things to the appropriate place. And it's like second nature, and it makes it easier for you to find things. The last thing that I'm going to mention is Notion. And so I've mentioned all these other little apps that I've used, or not little, but just apps that are usually good for one thing, right? It's either a specific social media app or a specific book app where I'll save stuff, or specific whatever app. But Notion is where it's like where all of my projects are, and my truly my second brain. And I'll link my Notion for creatives in the show notes at nachesnow.com/179. But for those of you guys who've seen it and heard me talk about it, I have all kind of stuff in there. For example, mindless stuff where this is not necessarily a must, but it's important for me, is entertainment. So anytime I watch a good movie, I put it in my Notion app and I rate it. And I'm a movie head. It just brings me joy. And then when I'm talking to people about my favorite sci-fi movies or what I rated certain things, I can just easily go to it because I always forget like movie titles and this and that. And so it's just easy for me to do that. Do they have apps that will allow you to do it too? Yes, there is even one. I think I recommended in my newsletter not too long ago. I'll put it in the show notes. But I didn't have to create a Notion page for it. I could have used like an app for it. I used to use like the Fandango app, and I used to use another app. But for me, I just preferred to keep it somewhere under my control. So I knew that like my data was safe, meaning like they wouldn't delete it or the company wouldn't go away. So that's just my personal choice, and it brings me joy. So it makes sense for me, and I actually use it when talking to friends. I already talked to you about my favorite websites. I'm into stained glass. I have stained glass where I've documented like all the resources for it and projects I want to work on. I have a plants page, and that helps me keep track of like when I've watered something, when I need to water something, the last time I've repotted something. So it keeps me sane. I have a home, it has all my home projects in it. This was a lifesaver when I first moved in here because it had almost like a checklist of everything I needed to do. And now I have a running list of all the things that I'm going to do in the future and all the things I need to do this year. And so that's nice and set up. I have a travel planner, and that travel planner is actually for sale. I'll link that too, but I have a video on how I use that, and it incorporates my Google Maps. And I love planning a good trip. I just love it. And so it's like my brain in a Notion travel planner. But anywho, that's in there. I have an education page, and then where I save all the books that I've read. So I was able to easily let you know all the productivity books that I've rated since I've started keeping this list. I just throw it in there. I give it a rating if I liked it or not. And so I just search productivity, and I can easily give people like my favorite books and classes on certain things. And I just like to track it because I don't want to keep all that data in my head, but I also love providing people resources. And so it's just a way for me to easily pull up that information. And then last but not least, in Notion, I have a business area, and it has a to-do list. I have all my podcast information in there. I've got a calendar section. I got a content section. I got a brain dump section. Anytime I have an idea for an article, a YouTube video, a podcast, whatever, it immediately goes into Notion. And to make it part of my daily habit, I also have Notion widgets on my iPhone with all the categories that I use the most. So then if I need to do my plants, I could just click on that plant widget. If I'm working on home stuff, I could go to that home widget. So it's all part of my ecosystem. But yes, I'm bought in to the second brain. I rely on it heavily, and it is part of my daily process. I'm not rigid about it, but I am to the point where that it's kind of like brushing my teeth, whereas it is part of my daily process. And I'm very forgiving if it's been a while since I've added the latest books I read. I just take maybe 20 minutes or whatever, go through my Audible or whatever, and I just add the books and just put my rating. It's no big deal if I miss something. I think that's important to give yourself some grace. And then, yeah, last little bits. Voice memos are great. Sometimes when I'm driving, I'll do a voice memo to myself and then listen to it later. And you can also add voice memos to like project folders, like in Notion or wherever else, and it's great. And then if you want to get really fancy, you could get apps where you can forward your email to, and then the emails that are related to a project could be put in specific project folders. There's just so many ways that you can really create sophisticated and automated systems. But the key is to start out with one thing. And then once you start doing that on a daily, weekly basis, then add something else, and then add something else. So maybe this week you start with folders, and let's say you declare email bankruptcy, have a folder called archive, put all your thousands of emails into that archive folder, and anything new that comes into your account from this day forward, you have a specific folder it goes to, or you unsubscribe. Maybe that's your project one. Or maybe your project one is Google Maps, and you favorite all your favorite restaurants and bookmark and save all the things you want to go to. Whatever it is, like figure out what is a priority to you and then go for it. And then just review your system and make sure that it's working for you. And if it's not working for you, then adjust. Okay, so I'm going to have links to a whole bunch of stuff on nachesnow.com/179. If for some reason you're just like, I need help, know that I do offer consultant services. I've done it for people for an hour. I've done it for 2 hours. I go up to 3 hours. And then if you want to too, I also have it where I have a package that goes over multiple weeks, but anywho, it's where I look at your systems and help you get organized and figure out all the things. So if you're interested in that, you can email me at hello@nachesnow.com. Just put in the subject line packages, and I will send you the packages that I have available for some one-on-one counseling. And if you just have small questions, then just leave a comment under the show notes, nachesnow.com/179. Okay, if you found this to be useful, you know what to do. 5 stars on Apple Podcast. Thumbs up on YouTube. Please rate me wherever you're listening. Remember, sharing is caring, my friends, and subscribe. I have another amazing guest coming up next week. She is a mosaic artist, and I saw her stuff while I was at the wharf, and I cannot wait to share her story and her art with you. She's so good. Anyway, until next week, talk to you later. Bye.